welcome to this special session for BBC Global News, Airborne, What Affluent Millennials Want from International Travel Brands. We're going to be focusing on that wonderful group of which I wish I could be considered a part, Affluent Millennials. We're going to be looking at some amazing insights from the BBC Insights team, led of course by we've got Hamish McPharlin, the director of BBC Insights, and then we're going to open it up to the panel and really focus on what this means for airline brands. And we have Sheldon He, who's the general manager of Singapore Airlines for UK and Ireland, and then down the end there we have Richard Strickland, who's the director.
John Strickland.
John, have I got Richard? I'm so sorry. We have John Strickland, who's the director of JLS Consulting and an aviation expert with over 37 years' experience. So some fantastic insights to be gleaned here today. We'll start off with Hamish.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Hamish McPharlin. I'm the head of Insight for BBC Global News, and I'm your little entree to get today off. Time for some pie charts, I say, to get us all thinking about this interesting, insightful, slightly problematic group of affluent millennials and how the hell we engage with them. I'm neither affluent nor a millennial. I just fall outside that commercially desirable little group, but I am a researcher, so I'm apparently allowed to do this anyway. What I would like to show you is some of the insight that we produce on a kind of monthly basis at BBC Global News to understand the travel sector and how people engage with it. Why are we interested in that? We're interested in it because BBC World News is a global premium news channel. It reaches affluent millennials. In fact, in lots of regions, it reaches more affluent millennials than any other international news provider. And we provide content for that group, just like we do any other. And so we want to understand them. Also, travel is, I think, the biggest industry that we have the advertisers on BBC Global News, BBC World News as well. So it's really key that we understand this group and how they work, how they tick. I've got 15 minutes. I'm famous for talking endlessly until someone charges on stage and tackles me. So we're going to... Krista's got the tap. She's also got the kick. And eventually she'll have the shove. And one way or another will shut me up in about 15 minutes. Okay, so I'd like to just kind of establish that at the Insight department, he says, over at Global News, we have quite a lot of kind of fundamentals that we understand about this group, and I thought we might as well just quickly knock off three of them that are pertinent to this study. We've known about these for a number of years. First of all, millennials is a topic that has been researched a lot, okay? They are the slightly troublesome young group that no one really understands, that any generation has to deal with, right? So this is the group for now. Although it must point out, when we think about millennials, we have to acknowledge they are getting older. So millennials used to be the kind of late teens, early 20s. Now they're the early 20s, early 20s, late 30s, early 30s. So they are getting older. Generations actually age. How about that? One thing that we are aware of is that the affluent millennials are what we call the real millennials, in that the things that we think we know about this group, actually it's the affluent group that are embodying those the most. And that's something I'm going to throw out there. It's a big provocative statement. And I haven't got a great deal of evidence to show you because we're here to talk about something else today. But you can look up bbcglobalnews.com and go to the Insights section and you will see a series of studies looking at what is kind of archetypal about affluent millennials and how they really embody what we think we know about millennials. Secondly, another thing that's really important to establish is that buying and purchasing is a real thing. I mean, it's a real thing for every generation, but specifically for affluent millennials, what you choose to buy is a reflection of your own sense of values. So you buy from companies that reflect your values and what you want to project about yourself. That's really important. And you might think that's pretty normal behavior if it's a luxury brand, for instance. But we've seen it across all different sectors. We see it for tech brands. We see it for travel and tourism as well. So I thought that's really important because it does kind of underpin a lot of what we learn about this group. And thirdly, many people might presume that millennials are quite a difficult group to engage with. They're tight with their money. They like to argue with you on Twitter. They've got a very short attention span. You know, these are the kind of stereotypes that we might think pertain to this group. Actually, what we find is a lot of that is just about misunderstanding. If you can work with this particular generation and you can talk to them the way that they'd like to be talked to, the reward, if you are authentic, and that's really what they're looking for, is honest brands that are honest. Every brand and company makes mistakes these days. It's all kind of out there. It's not about whether or not you can avoid making a mistake. It's whether you're authentic and honest and have a very real human face to your company that they would really love to engage with. If you can do that, you are rewarded with a high degree of loyalty. Okay, so we're going to look at just 3 things today in the remaining minutes I've got left, and then I'll hand it back to Krista and we can have a discussion with these fine people here on what this all means for the industry. Let's talk a little bit about affluent millennials and leisure travel. What's in it for them? Why do they do it? What is a leisure trip for an affluent millennial? What do they look for in an airline brand as well? Is it all just about options? Is it about ticket prices? Is it something else? What kind of values should an airline brand embody that really attracts this group? And finally, a little bit that's obviously something that's key to the BBC is how can we engage with them? How can we be persuasive? How can we advertise to them in a way that they would really like us to reach out and connect with them? Okay, not small objectives. And I'm aware I'm going to be going through these at chipmunk speed, but we'll give it a shot. Okay, so this is a study we did a little earlier this year, 3,262 millennials. I've put age 16 to 34. Some of the sharper people in the room might go, a 16-year-old is not so much a millennial anymore. They were a few years ago, and sure enough, this group's been slowly moving. The reason why we use this group is we kind of benchmark this against a series of surveys. We've done about 8 of these. So I kind of use the 16 to 34 group, but what I will say is I've upweighted it towards the 25 to 34 segment. So they are the predominant data you're going to see in the stats as we go through. These are the markets that we tested in. So we've got affluent millennials from Canada, USA, UK, Germany, France, South Africa, Singapore, and my own country, Australia. And affluent, you can define that a few different ways. We use GWI's metric, the Global Web Index, which is an international kind of omnibus that looks at affluence. They call it they measure affluence by being the top 25% household income earners in your market. Okay, let's get started. Number 1, what does leisure travel mean to the affluent millennial? Let's take a look at that. We talked to this group, and I want to just sort of point out a few little findings before we dive into how this kind of pertains to airline brands. First one is they're very, very enthusiastic travelers. They love to travel. So at the time that we talked to these people, 3 in every 4 affluent millennials said they'd travelled internationally for leisure in the past 12 months. They love to travel. In fact, we had 85% saying they're planning a trip in the next 12 months. We also see over time, because we've been running these studies for about 3 years now, as they get older, we're seeing some changes in how they travel. 2 years ago, in 2016, 3 years now, we could see quite a lot would travel alone. And that was a real thing about millennials. You go off to find yourself, climb a mountain and stare at a tree and think about life's mysteries. And actually now we're seeing they're increasingly traveling with their families. Only 7% of affluent millennials travel alone now, and half travel with their family or a partner. They also love to get off the beaten track. So it's not just about being in a gorgeous hotel and laying your head on beautiful silken Egyptian cotton, but they want to stay in hotels, but also B&Bs, spas. What else we got there? Camper vans, yurts, farm stays, eco lodges. The key is the desire for an authentic experience. They aren't looking so much for a relaxing holiday. And you might see that, for instance, baby boomers. They go and they want to have a lovely relaxing holiday where someone come out and clean their glasses while they're on the beach and things like that. This group can kind of handle that for about 2 days, and then they go mad. They've got to get out and go meet some people. They want to do culture, music, cuisine, understand something. They want to come back with stories. And they don't want stories everyone's got. They want their story, who they interacted with, who they met, what they discovered that is unique to them. Okay, here's another one that was really interesting to us, was that we could see that affluent millennials are very interested in sustainability, and they acknowledge that travel, whilst they love to do it, does come with kind of carbon footprint implications, right? It's not free to the environment that you would travel. And they're aware of that, and they're very interested in brands that can help them minimize their carbon footprint and be as sustainable as possible, but they still very much want to travel. And one of the reasons is they really feel that it benefits the world that they travel. They feel that everyone should travel, because by traveling you can understand diversity, different cultures, you can make connections with people and realize that people from all over the world, from developing countries, different ethnicities, that we are all very much the same. And 81% said they believe that travel allows people to improve their ability to understand and appreciate people from all around the world. And 83% believe that travel and tourism are important for jobs and prosperity around the world. So there was quite a tendency towards, when you go to a country, to make sure you're putting money into the community, buy from local sellers, buy from markets and things like that. Maybe less of a tendency to haggle so much these days as well. Actually, I'm proud to say the markets, there were 3 markets that were popped the highest for this, that they felt that travel benefited local communities. Australia, where Krista and I are from, 70% felt that was the highest. Then South Africa and Singapore, and least was Germany. Don't know how to feel about that. Okay. And along with that, they love to support the communities that they visit. They really care about the places they go. They're interested in exploring history, meeting locals, experiencing the culture. We found that 70% eat at local restaurants. A third will choose their holiday purchasing from local operators on the ground rather than going through the hotel chain and things like that. So they really want to give back to those communities. And look at that, 1 in 5 have assisted in a community project, some kind of conservation project while they were out. This could have been cleaning beaches and parks, planting trees, caring for wildlife, participating in some kind of conservation project. And what I was interested to see is that if you look around, you'll see that there's quite a lot of initiatives put together to support this. So this is one of them. That allows you to go and basically do ecotourism, look after a habitat, or restore something, or care for wildlife and things like that. And we found actually affluent millennials from France had the highest tendency to want to do this. Well done, France. This one's called podvolunteer.org. Okay, we're going to have to wrap this up. Chris has given me that look. So let's dive into a little bit about, okay, what does this all mean from airline brands? First of all, when we ask affluent millennials what's important when it comes to choosing which airlines to go with, price is still number 1, and I think you would tend to find that no matter which generation you talk to. Just because you may be an affluent sub-segment of a generation doesn't mean price is not a concern. However, let's look a little bit below that. What I did is I did an index comparison of a lot of different considerations against non-affluent millennials, and this is what popped out. We found 2 that really popped in terms of the distinctness of the affluent millennials. First one was great multimedia on board. So they really love technology, and they're real technologists. They're very passionate about it, and they love how it can help make their lives easier. When they're on the plane, they love to have a great multimedia experience. Perhaps we'll have a chat today with our colleagues here about how what kind of strategies they've got in play to ensure a great multimedia experience. And the other one is flexibility. And this is an interesting paradox, right? They care about the environment, they care about sustainability, but they still want more options, more flights, more ability. And this is one of these paradoxes we have to live with as an industry, I think. This is true. It is true that they care about the environment. It is true they care about their carbon footprint, but they do love to travel, and they are time poor, and they need options. Okay, how do we, rather than look at that and get very upset about it, how do we find ways to bring that together and make it work? This is now looking at the index of importance by how many times you fly per year. And you can see the more that you fly, the more that you care for certain things. So the very heaviest of affluent millennial travellers, the 2 biggest things they want are Wi-Fi on board, and you might know quite a few airlines carry this now, and others have talking about carrying Wi-Fi on board. And the second one is live streaming channels. And not to be too self-serving, but news is a big one. Being able to be in touch with international news while you're in the air. Because we could see inside the data, it's not all consumer travel. A lot of this is business as well. And if you are a part of that, whether you're an affluent millennial or not, knowing what's going on in the air or on the ground is really important. You need to know what's going on in the news when you land. And actually, that's just a final one there. That's a 163. That's a really high tendency for those who fly first or business to want live streaming TV. Okay. Those who travel heaviest also really appreciate the history and heritage of the brand. They're really into that, but you can see another one that was very important to them. Show how their airline is helping and serving communities. There's that kind of sustainability message, brand values coming in. It's not just what you offer me. What do you offer? How are you making the world a better place? How are you serving communities? And we could see this across lots of different sectors. And you can see that index is higher than price. Okay, last one before we take it to the panel. How do we engage with this group? So the first thing we asked them was, what kind of brand values do you think should an airline kind of aspire to project to really engage with you? Now, you might look at this and want to have a bit of a chuckle. They're a bit more interested in you being inspiring than you being safe, it seems to be saying. Don't worry, they're still very much interested in an airline plane staying in the air, but it's more hygiene. They kind of expect you to have the highest standards. Of course, they should be able to access that information. But what they really love, and we've seen this with other categories as well, is brands that have a real personality. And when it comes to travel, the personality should reflect the beauty and wonder of travel. Being inspiring, being authentic, being innovative. These are the things that they love about travel. If you can make your brand about those, that's something they'd really love to engage with as well. And last bit, which is a bit nerdy for me, and hopefully you guys will like this, I was very interested in what types of advertising formats that they're interested in, that they find engaging specifically for travel brands. And a lot of it comes down to very rich media, because they love to see brands, travel destinations being brought to life. So that means video, that means immersive experiences, 3D, drone shots, really show me what's going on, stories on the ground. So number one probably doesn't surprise you too much, TV, a TV advertisement can really provide that rich media experience, particularly that we all have gigantic TVs in our homes these days. Number two was branded video content. So this is brands such as those who are in this room today creating content, but authentic stories on the ground, places you can go and authentic experiences that you can have. And the last, most nerdiest thing that I did, which took a lot of time and probably no one will ever appreciate it properly, but we'll give it a shot, was I tried to figure out if you were to choose, if you're a marketeer for an advertising brand in travel, and you wanted to choose two formats to run your media plan, what are the two that you could choose that would, when used in conjunction, would spread the most in terms of their appeal across this segment? Because you might say, well, it was the top two, right? Number one and number two. It may not have been, because if they have too much crossover, then they're not Venn diagramming enough out. Does that make sense? What I was trying to basically say was, if you were to choose two formats, which two formats will appeal to the most of the affluent millennial segment? And it was TV spot plus brand film. So 41% say that a TV spot is influential, and an additional 17% don't say that, but they do say that a brand film is. That's branded content. And if you do both of those, you will reach you will appeal to and influence 57% of affluent millennials. Now, I know there's a lot more moving parts behind the scenes in terms of how you put a media plan together. I am not a media planner, but from a research perspective, I find that really interesting. And perhaps that's something to put in your books for when you next talk to your advertising platform about what is the best way to reach this group for travel. Okay, I think that's me. I'm just going to leave these up, and perhaps we can just leave these up as we talk. These are just kind of the basic takeaways of the study. Hope you found it interesting. I think we're going to have a Slido go up, is that right? Where you can submit some questions. And Crystal will probably tell you a little bit about that. And we'll now have the panel. Thank you all. I hope you found that interesting. Oh, you don't need this.
I don't need that. I don't need that. Thank you so much, Dr. Hamish. Some fantastic insights there. And I want to open it up to the panel. The first question, Sheldon, John, what's your reaction to this research? Is there anything in there that was surprising to you?
Well, go ahead. No, I was very surprised, because I'm certainly not a millennial. I'm an aging throwback.
You surprised me.
But I can think of an airline that was around until a few months ago called WOW. It was a low-cost long-haul airline based in Iceland, flying to the USA and to different European destinations, using Iceland as a transfer point. And it explicitly targeted millennials, but it seemed to have attracted only the price-sensitive element. They were getting very low-fare travellers, they were filling up the plane. So two problems. They went out of business in March this year because they weren't making money, their revenues didn't match their levels of costs. And even before they'd come to that final difficult time financially, they were a small airline, they were flying their planes pretty intensively, and because they went through social media and they appealed to millennials, whenever they had a delay or a flight cancelled, it went like wildfire all over social media. I'm sleeping on a floor in Keflavik Airport, Iceland, or stuck in a US city, they're not telling me anything. So that was a way not only to disappoint the travellers you've got, but to avoid having more. So I was very surprised to see in this research that it isn't all about price. There are a lot of millennials who they want a deal, but that deal could be in a premium seat, first class or business class.
I think I just want to echo John's points about a little bit about the counterintuition about price. You tend to have this image of a millennial customer that essentially takes budget travel all the time, and that tends to maximize their travel spend at the destination as opposed to on the journey. But quite a few of the insights, I think, Hamish, that you shared, do resonate with us. We do find that oftentimes millennials, especially affluent millennials who travel with us, appreciate what Singapore Airlines has to offer in terms of the sort of care and personalized attention that we try and deliver to every customer on board. And they wind up, even though they're quite youthful, they actually wind up becoming some of our most loyal and most almost enthusiastic supporters and advocates. And that's really something that's quite true, I suspect, in this particular age group, that once they're won over, and if you can maintain their trust, they actually become one of your best supporters, be it to their friends or just to their circle of influence. The other thing that I think really popped out was the fact that I think the whole idea about authenticity is quite key with these customers, and I think that alludes to a little bit about that experience with WOW, in the sense that I think if you let customers down or you pretend to be something that you're not, this particular segment's probably going to hold you to account a lot more. Yeah. So we see that a lot with our own customer base.
I think I was interested as well, this whole idea that you mentioned, Hamish, about rich content. I mean, I joined the airline industry at a time when we sold tickets by either ourselves, I was a telephone sales agent, looking on the screen at a list of flights, what time they flew, and what price was available. And travel agents more or less did the same thing. There was nothing really fancy about it. The whole idea now of rich content, that just as we do with hotels or destinations, we now can do with flights. We can see what that seat looks like. Is that meal appetizing and tasty? What did people say about that airline? Was it actually a good experience? We can compare the basics, beyond safety, which I think you're right, is a given. People expect that. But is the airline punctual? Does it actually get you there when you expect? So there's no hiding now for airlines. They have to be able to measure up and use the right means that is app and mobile driven to reach these customers.
Sheldon, one for you. Is Singapore Airlines actively targeting this group, and what strategies have you put in place in order to be able to cater to their needs?
So we are definitely looking at these customers. They represent the customers of our future, and I think we would be very foolish not to look at what their needs are. Fundamentally, I think apart from authenticity, this expectation about a digitally enabled experience, I think, has become critical. This generation has grown up with an entirely integrated online and offline lifestyle in a way, and because of that, their expectations are actually dictated and set by the sort of experience they have with other online brands. One of the things that we felt very, very strongly was even as a premium airline, I think we would lose a lot of credibility amongst this population or amongst this segment if we didn't have a digital experience that was premium. And that didn't necessarily mean a lot of bells and whistles. It meant things that worked, things that were quick, that were intuitive, and that were basically technology that was designed around the customer's experience and just to make the end-to-end experience a lot more seamless. And we've been putting a huge amount of effort into that to try and ensure that we live up to those expectations.
Well, why don't we segue a bit onto the onboard experience? This seems to be a really big part of what people are expecting, or these affluent millennials are expecting. Hamish, maybe you could tell us a little bit about, are we expecting just Wi-Fi, or are there greater expectations among those that you've researched?
I think we might, as an industry, presume it's just about giving everyone Wi-Fi, and that all you got to do is just offer it, and they would just look for it and pay for it on the plane. We've done quite a few studies kind of unpicking that, and we've realised that it's a lot more than that. It's actually about the whole experience. So it's, Sheldon here talking about Singapore Airlines strategy of having a digital experience. It probably starts when you buy the ticket and works all the way through to being in the airport, on the plane and so forth. That's important. The second one is that the Wi-Fi is really just about connecting your device, isn't it? And the device is not the only thing they would like to engage with. My data is telling me that the seatback system is still really, really key. It's a bigger screen, And this is your second screen. And we often find that the primary screen for entertainment is still going to be the seatback system, and then your phone will be the other thing that you do. So if there's Wi-Fi, great, sure, you might do a bit of social media, but at the end of the day, this is packed full of movies and TV shows, and it's going to keep you entertained, and it's a nice big screen if it's a kind of a new fleet. And they really enjoy that. And live TV news, sport, I've been on some flights where a big sporting event was going on out there in the world, and they were broadcasting it or simulcasting it live to the plane, and it's electrifying to be in the air watching, the World Cup or whatever it is that you're watching. And I took a photo, I wish I had it, of every single seatback system was on, watching, and we were all watching exactly the same thing while we're in the air. And I remember thinking, wow, live TV ain't dead up here. It's all about events, and it's all about opportunity, and it's about staying in touch with what's going on the ground.
And John, is this a trend that you're seeing among the different clients you have?
I mean, there's been a massive change of the whole idea of in-flight entertainment from the days when it first came on and you were forced to shut the blinds, look at that screen at the end of the cabin, have your plastic headsets with the sound pipe through, up to much better standard electronics. But as Hamish says, people want to interact now. They maybe don't like what the airline is offering directly, but if you can watch a Netflix film, for example, because the functionality is there. And I think I saw BA quoted the other day, they waited quite a while to put Wi-Fi on. A lot of airlines rushed to get in there, and it wasn't too reliable. They said they had 100 Netflix sessions running on one flight the other day. But as Hamish said, they were probably watching the Netflix picture on the seatback video. So airlines have got to compete on that, but extra information about what's going to happen at your destination, being able to reach people. And one thing we shouldn't forget for airlines, if they do it right, they actually have a chance then to sell a bit more to the customers in the seats, especially customers who've maybe bought the basic price product without a meal, without any other add-ons. You might be able to sell them something else on board if you do it in the right way.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned just before, Hamish, about the ability of those in the audience, if you've got a burning question for the panel, there is a link. Is it possible to get the session slide up with the instructions on how to do that? Fantastic. So if you have anything for the panel, towards the end, we'll be checking through those questions and answering a couple of those, assuming time permits, because we've got a lot to get through. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the experience of being on board, but there's also this preference for rich media, for storytelling branded content. Sheldon, what are the particular strategies that you guys have put in place at Singapore Airlines? Is it partnerships? Is it what are you doing in that space?
Well, it's a combination of things. I think one early lesson when we learned about this audience and when we started to engage with them was, just going out with a whole bunch of posts on social media. That didn't really get you very far, because I think it comes back down to the whole authenticity theme we heard about earlier. This group actually looks for stories that are engaging, that inspire them. I think inspiration was another word that came about. And so a lot of our advertising and content has shifted. We still have traditional TV spots, so I'm happy to report that I'm actually, quite aligned with your research with Singapore Airlines. Well done. But branded content or storytelling has become very much more an integral part of our media mix. There's a recent project that we put out there together with the Singapore Tourism Board, and essentially it was called Unforgettable Journeys, and we discovered that there were 3 cities around the world called, if I'm not mistaken, dull, boring and bland. And that was also one of the things, 3 common misconceptions about Singapore, that Singapore was sometimes thought about as dull, boring, and perhaps a little bit bland. And so we got a bunch of people from dull, boring, and bland to visit Singapore, and we brought a team to visit their towns to discover that, not everything is as you assume, and there's a lot more that goes under the skin, and that content did very well, and it really helped to capture what it is that we were trying to communicate, which was look a little bit deeper, and there's a lot of magic that you can still discover, both for the brand Singapore Airlines and also Singapore, and also of course dull, boring and bland and their communities.
That sounds absolutely brilliant, and a really interesting way to target that group as well, with something that sort of sounds a little bit out there, but I bet when you get it on your screen, it makes perfect sense and you're showcasing the best for Singapore too. So One of the big findings from the research was about the ethical and environmental concerns of this group. And as airlines, there's a bit of an elephant in the room in terms of a traveller's carbon footprint. They're weighing up their options in terms of, which way they're going to choose to travel. What strategies do you guys have in place in order to kind of offset that, to take on that challenge?
Well, I'll go first. I think the truth is that this is a challenge for the industry as a whole. I think we would be foolish not to acknowledge that there is a carbon issue with travel and aviation. There is a lot of work that's being done both by the manufacturers of aircraft technology to try and improve on that. And that improvement in reducing the carbon footprint is actually being seen in a lot of the new fleet types that are being offered. So as an airline, I think one of the fundamental things that we do is to keep replacing our fleets. We've committed to maintaining one of the youngest fleets in the world. So for the next 3 years, we're actually in the midst of a complete refleeting exercise. So if I'm not mistaken, if my facts are correct, we actually are receiving one new plane every 2 weeks. And that entire process should enable us to operate one of the most fuel-efficient fleets around, and therefore, with the minimum amount of carbon footprint. Beyond that, I think it's also about a broader effort, really. It's about making sure that all of our practices are sustainable, whether it's about sourcing for food, having sustainable business practices. We also have a project in Southeast Asia. It's called the Harapan Project, and it's a project that we've partnered with a kind of a forest community. And at the latest, I think we have about 6,900 acres of forest and green trees that have been rejuvenated and refreshed as part of our continued commitment to make sure that we are balanced in all of the things that we do. Yeah.
John, give us a sense of the broader industry's approach to this.
I mean, as you said, it certainly is the elephant in the room. It's the biggest challenge the industry faces, and I think it's only just beginning to dawn. In some respects, the industry has taken, including myself as someone working in the industry, a defensive approach. We only contribute 2% of emissions, although you look at the statistics, and if air travel grows, then it's going to become maybe 50% of emissions if we're all still here, or if our next generation, millennials, are here in 40, 50 years' time. And I think it goes beyond just talking about how many grams of carbon we emit per passenger. I saw that today. Ryanair had some financial figures out this morning. They were talking about being Europe's greenest, leanest airline. Well, yes, that's in technical terms, but the industry needs to take a better approach. They need to show directly on board they're eliminating plastics, and that's something, to be fair to Ryanair. They say they will be plastic-free in a few years. I saw another airline where the amenity bag, where they were giving out a wash bag in a premium cabin, was made out of recycled plastic bottles. But I think most interesting, KLM, the Dutch airline, is taking a lead. They ran a social media advertisement on YouTube, and it actually said, we've come a long way, we facilitate the human race in its travels, but do you have to fly? Maybe could you do a video conference? Could you go on a train? Now that might seem, hey, that's crazy. That's like Turkey's voting for Christmas. But I think that's the moral high ground the industry has got to get to without throwing away its own business, show that it's doing everything and more, and educating not only the public, but getting people like millennials on side to say, hey, listen guys, you want to have these exciting experiential holidays, but the government's taking all that tax off us on the ticket. We're not spending it back on helping us to get research into biofuels. We're not getting rid of air traffic congestion. You guys could help us so you can still have your holidays. We can burn less fuel by not flying in circles waiting to come into Heathrow. So there's a lot to do.
Well, that seems to be an example of what you were talking about, Hamish, in terms of the values, that sort of authenticity of telling it like it is. Mm-hmm. Is that something that really popped up with this group?
Yeah, and what I found interesting is how nuanced it has to be. It's, if I could encapsulate it, there's a difference between saying, hey, we give to charity, or hey, we have a very fuel efficient fleet, and actually being able to authentically say, we have baked this into our corporate culture, because it's not just about paying lip service to these kind of things. They're looking for companies that embody it as a kind of overarching principle of the company. So that doesn't just mean that they have some efficiencies here or there. It means that they look after their workers, and that they pay people fairly. And these are kind of the things that they're looking for that allows them to really trust a company. And as I said earlier, the key to that is a very high bar to jump over, but the reward is a very high degree of loyalty from a very vocal audience. And we talk a lot about how critical a generation can be who are very socially savvy, but they can also be very favourable towards brands in a public sphere, and that does great work for promoting those brands as well.
Fantastic. As you're speaking there, I've just seen popping up behind you there. We've got some questions. Thanks so much, guys.
Oh.
All right, so I'm going to just start from the top, and hopefully we can get through a few of these ones. So for millennials, travel is a social good. Are we about to see a generational shift where the next generation views it as socially irresponsible for green reasons? Maybe, Hamish, you want to start off with that one?
I'm going to be an infuriating researcher, and so I haven't researched that yet, so I don't know. I will say that, you know, this particular generation, you know, they are the young kind of professionals and the 20-somethings that we're talking to today. You know, I will start to move our research into the next generation, Generation Z, or whatever we call them, and really trying to understand them as they become those, start to get jobs and start having buying power. I will say, though, that I don't know that it will necessarily come that way, because we can already see initiatives, just as you say, and we see it inside the BBC as well. I sometimes travel for work, but I'm encouraged at all times to ask myself, can I do a teleconference? Can I do a video conference? And I tend to feel that those kind of sentiments, you could challenge me and say that's not a millennial thing, and you would partly be right. I think the humanity's social consciousness changes. It doesn't matter how old you are, you can become aware of these kind of social topics. It's not just something for millennials to worry about. I think Generation Z worries about it. I'm Generation X, I worry about it too. And I think that it pervades all of the generations. It may start with the young people of today, right? That was the millennials that we've been thinking about for the last 10 years. The next generation, who knows where they're going to go with that, but I don't think there will ever be a reduction in the desire to get to know the world and to go out and see things. Authenticity means being places. It doesn't mean trying to understand them from a distance. So I still feel that people will always want to travel.
A quick one for Sheldon is, I mean, how far ahead are you looking at Singapore Airlines? Are you looking at Generation Z? Are you sort of trying to future-proof for a day where potentially it may be seen as irresponsible, and how to offset that?
Well, I think we do have to take a long-term view of what customers believe. I think in our own research so far, what we've found is that increasingly, whether it's the millennial generation or Generation Z, there's an increasing importance of brands to be serious about the concerns that these generations have. I'm not entirely convinced that even within the next generation, that these consumers will actually shift entirely to move away from travel. But I think that they will want to see brands like ourselves, any of the travel brands, actually being serious about reducing their footprint and making sure that whatever they do, let's say, encourage travel, it's for a meaningful purpose and a purpose that advances the cause of humanity. If it's, if that doesn't sound a bit too esoteric,
All right.
Just add a quick point on that. I think it's also a complexity for airlines that this is not a homogenous experience around the world. I mean, in the research we saw mainly mature market attitudes in millennial age group. But if we think of it, economies, the power economies moving ahead, particularly in Asia, led by China or young generation in Africa, for example, they can have the aspirations to travel too. They're not to say they don't care, but they're not going to have top of mind the environmental angle. They think we want to get to do this, and they have the same social media and device access that the rest of the world has got.
I was having a bit of a look earlier. It's disappeared off the screen now, but it was a great question there from somebody in the audience. They're 57, and they said, well, I love tech, and I have these sort of social conscience values as well. How much does this research apply to other groups, and will the same strategies actually work more broadly?
Yeah, I think we talked about that, just earlier, didn't we? That the idea that we can't assume that this is something siloed towards millennials, and they are the only ones that would have the genesis of being socially minded. I think in any generation, you can look at the young people, the young students that become workers, that kind of 15 to 25-year-old, and say that a lot of the kind of great radical ideas for social change come from that group. And I think, we put a pin in it today and the last 10 years, and we see that again. But I'm not a millennial, and I also agree with a lot of the things that are talked about here. And I think they do pervade the other generations. Just because they may have found their voice through millennials now doesn't mean that they aren't something that can be shared by other generations as well.
I was really enthused, to see that this is the thinking of a younger generation or the millennial generation, because I read another article where it said people are looking more for experiences than things. I thought, well, that's how I feel. I'm a long way above the millennial demographic, close to that the 57-year-old who put the anonymous question, but I agree with that. I'd rather have a trip somewhere, something memorable. I think you can't take away memories. Maybe you can invest something, it goes down in value, or a car breaks or rusts, but you'll always have those memories and that encounter you had with somebody somewhere.
I think that's quite hopeful for all of us, isn't it? If we're looking to this younger generation, seeing that as hope for the future, and maybe it's going to encourage those sorts of reactions in ourselves as well. Okay, well, we've come to the end of our session. Thanks everybody for your questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to too many of them. Thank you so much to our expert panelists.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.